Good afternoon, and welcome to another AAA Automotive Conversation. My name is Robert Sinclair Jr. I'm the Senior Manager of Public Affairs for AAA Northeast. And while the weather is pretty nice today with temperatures in the 70s, as surely as day follows night, cold weather will be upon us soon with sub-freezing temperatures. And with this being October and Car Care Month, we wanted to help you get your vehicle ready for the winter. And we couldn't think of a better person to help us than Mr. Michael Porcelli. And Michael, thank you very much for joining us.
Happy to be here.
All right. Now, Michael's resume is extremely long. You look up Renaissance man in the dictionary, and Michael's picture should be there. Michael is certified in 62 of the 63 areas of certification by the ASE, showing him as a master mechanic. The only one that he's not certified in is slacking off on weekends. No, I'm kidding. It's actually, I think, electric vehicles, right, Michael?
Yes, correct. And I'll have that soon.
He'll have that soon. It's just a matter of taking the test. Michael teaches automotive technician training at Bronx Community College. He has, where did we go? The degrees, a BA in economics and psychology, a master's in business administration. He studied mechanical engineering at the Pratt Institute. His father, who we learned a lot from, was a master aircraft mechanic during World War II and a master collision specialist. And Michael himself has been operating the family vehicle repair shop for more than 40 years. That business is more than 70 years old. Have I missed anything? Michael was in the Army as a company motor officer, and he has done also custom engineering and fabrication, electrical and mechanical systems, modifications, and custom refinishing. He is a court-certified expert witness, talking about things related to mechanicals of vehicles. And he is the host of a radio program called the Auto Lab, which I am pleasured. I'm just so happy to be a part of every Saturday morning from 7 to 9 a.m. on WNYM 970, The Answer. So Michael, given all of that, I think there's no better person that we could have to tell us things about vehicles and what we need to do to prepare them for the winter. But before we get started, I want to show something that you built. Back in the 1970s, you built a custom vehicle that has no peer. It was a double-ended 1972 Oldsmobile Toronado, and there it is. And it's got two essentially front ends, an engine and front end, steering wheel and steering at both ends of the vehicle. It weighed more than 7,200 pounds. And I understand that you ran it at the drag strip and actually got that behemoth up to 58 miles per hour. Now, I have one question related to this vehicle, and it's something my grandfather used to ask me every time I did something bad. He would look at me and say, why? Why did you build a vehicle like that?
I have to confess, it wasn't my idea. It was a shop I was doing consulting. While I was in graduate school, I was doing consulting work for shops and actually writing my thesis on the industry. And this shop I was at, he had the idea to build the car, but he had nobody with the experience and the technical skills to get the job done. So I wound up finishing it.
Wow. Now, what's involved in the engineering? Those were body on frame cars, so I guess the frame, the underlying frame had to be strengthened and very strong, and you did a lot of work with that?
Yes, and the car has two of everything, and everything works on both ends.
Wow. So could you drive it from one end and another person steer it from the back end like a hook and ladder?
Yes, in fact, it can go sideways on a diagonal. I drove it on live TV, driving from one curb to the other.
Yeah, and it was a big hit at the auto shows for a few years running, wasn't it?
We had it there for about 4 years, and I think it was the biggest attraction at the show. We had the biggest crowds of the whole show.
Wow.
And everybody wanted to ask the same question. What happens if you go on both ends at the same time. You know,
Yeah.
you go forward on both ends. That's what everybody wanted to know.
You get a lot of wheel spin, I would imagine, a lot of tire smoke.
Yes. Well, we never tried that, but we did drive it in circles, drive it sideways, drove it on live TV with camera crews inside. It was a lot of fun.
That's awesome. What engines were in those? Were in
Well,
it?
I think there were 455s.
That makes sense. Yeah.
If I remember correctly.
Big 455 V8s. You know, I just wanted to ask you, you've been in business and doing things with vehicle mechanics for 40 plus years, maybe even longer than that. What would you say are the biggest changes that you've seen during those years in total, and maybe the last 10 to 15 years in particular in the auto industry or with the vehicles themselves?
The biggest change in the last 20 years is computer control of everything. Everything on a car today is computer controlled. Your power windows are computer controlled. Your lights are computer controlled. Everything is controlled by computers. And people now think that you have to be a computer programmer to work on some of these new cars.
Are the computers doing better things? Are we better off for having all these computers on vehicles?
You know, we have a saying, they don't make them like they used to, and then we say, thank God. Because we didn't have all the safety systems years ago. In the winter, cars wouldn't start in the winter, in the cold weather. And now even the cheapest car starts right up. And no matter what the weather, you're pretty much guaranteed, unless your car has a problem, the car will start right up no matter what the weather is.
And in fact, these computer systems, they like cold, don't they? So they probably operate better when the weather is cold.
Well, computers don't like extreme temperature, either hot or cold, mainly hot. Like, they don't like it hot. They overheat.
Okay.
They overheat. They do strange things.
Yes. Well, it's a perfect segue to going in to talk about what we need to get ready for this winter. What are the stresses that cold weather place on a vehicle?
The most obvious thing is all the fluids get very thick. And in the old days, you used to change the oil, winter oil and summer oil in the engine. Today, we don't do that anymore. The oil chemistry today is so superior to what we had 50 years ago. When I was a kid, we'd have to put in summer oil and winter oil, and you'd rebuild an engine every 3 or 4 years. Today, nobody rebuilds an engine. Unless, the only time I think you rebuild an engine today is if you don't give the car proper maintenance. Don't change the oil on the required schedule. Then you will blow the engine. But if a car today is maintained according to the proper schedule, the recommended schedule, unless, you know, there are exceptions to every rule, but today the rule is you go hundreds of thousands of miles without changing an engine or a transmission, and that was unheard of 50 years ago.
So those things are better. I recall reading recently a question to AAA's car doctor, John Paul, and a person had an Audi, and they had just changed the oil maybe 6 or 7 months ago, didn't check it during that time, and then the engine seized for the lack of oil. And I know that certain models, very often them high performance German vehicles, actually burn a certain amount of oil every month. Why does that happen?
There are a lot of cars that have oil consumption issues, and the manufacturers all say it's normal. Cadillacs were burning a lot of oil, certain engines in Cadillacs, and the German cars and the Hyundai. We got an email from a listener the other day asking about his car had excessive oil usage on his Hyundai, and the dealer was telling him it was normal.
Is it normal, or should we consider it normal?
On some cars, a certain amount is, but if you're burning more than a quart in 1,000 miles or 1,500 miles, that I would say is excessive.
That's excessive. So it's very important that we check our oil, no matter what, particularly if you've got one of those brands that are reputed to be oil burners.
Yeah, and today a lot of the fancier cars have so many sensors on them. They tell you the level of the oil. They'll tell you the tire pressure in each tire. They'll tell you exactly what your oil level is. They'll tell you when you're due for an oil change. We didn't have those things 50 years ago. We had to keep our own notes, which we never remembered to check.
I wanted to ask you about coolant. And I know that, back in the old days, when winter was approaching, you'd go down to the auto parts store, you get a gallon of Prestone, you'd mix it with water, 50-50 mix usually, you pour it in the radiator and ran the car with the radiator cap off, make sure the pump opened up the valve.
Thermostat.
The thermostat, yes, make sure that opened and it circulated. But we don't do that anymore. What's going on these days? There's some coolants. I have a Subaru with 33,000 miles on it, and I sent it in for 30,000 mile check, and the coolant, same coolant. That supposedly they're super coolants. They last a long time, and the coolants are very specific to a particular type of vehicle. Why do we have these special coolants? How do they work? And what are the properties in them such that you can only use one brand's coolant in that brand of vehicle and not in another?
Like I said before, with the oil chemistry, the chemistry is so advanced today. Cars require very specific engine oil and transmission oil. And the same is true with coolant. The chemistry in the coolant is exotic. The materials that are used inside these systems, the metals that are used, the alloys that are used, will be corroded by certain chemicals that are in the coolant or the lubricant. So you have to make sure you use exactly what the manufacturer specifies, especially on a hybrid or electric vehicle. If you put the wrong coolant in a hybrid car, you could destroy the hybrid system. You could have electricity flowing where you don't want it flowing. You don't want to be sitting in a car with 600 volts flowing in through your shift handle, your steering wheel. You will at least destroy the air conditioning system if you put in the wrong refrigerant, and you'll destroy a cooling system and maybe the battery and the inverter in a hybrid car. Batteries and inverters are cooled with either engine coolant or a separate cooling system or a separate air conditioning system. And if you don't use the exact specified material in the coolant or the refrigerant, you'll destroy an entire air conditioning system or the entire hybrid system.
Some extra considerations with these hybrid and electric vehicles. Now, I'm going to get more on those vehicles in a minute, but just to finish up with what we need to do during a car care month to get our vehicles ready for the winter time. If there were a checklist that you would give to a motorist, we're heading into the colder weather, what would you tell them to do or to have done?
Well, if people want to be do-it-yourselfers, check all the coolant levels, the lubrication, the engine oil level, all the fluid levels. Check the tire pressures. Although most cars today have tire pressure monitoring systems, so people just don't think about the tires until the light pops up on the dashboard telling them a tire is low. But everybody should really have a family automotive technician, just like everybody should have a family doctor. Everybody should have a family car doctor that you go to 2-3 times a year and just get a checkup and make sure everything is working properly, because we spot things. Every time a customer comes in for whatever reason, we look around the car and we look to see if there's any problems developing. We recommend that people don't go to strangers, and don't go to somebody different every time. You want to stay with somebody who knows your vehicle, who knows you, knows your habits, knows how you use the car. If you're going on a trip, make sure it's properly checked out, that it'll survive the trip, and that all the safety systems are working, all the lights are working. Most states today have eliminated their safety inspections. There's very few states that even have safety inspections, and the ones that had them years ago, about half of them have given up the safety inspections. And we think that's a mistake, because whenever a car comes in for a state inspection, in New York, in this area, we do both emissions and safety. We find a lot of safety defects when people come in for their annual inspection. And if you eliminate, the state eliminates the necessity of getting a safety inspection, those cars are staying on the road with safety defects.
What sort of defects do you see when there aren't regular inspections?
Biggest thing I think is worn tires, lights that don't work, windows that either have excessive tint or so many decals in them you can't see through them. Mostly lighting and tires and brakes. And there's also the front end components, all the steering and suspension parts. You see, and every time you see a car on the highway with a wheel falling off, the wheel is hanging out to the side. He lost a ball joint or a control arm or something let go to cause that to happen. Now, if a car was inspected at least once a year, we recommend 2 or 3 times a year, those things wouldn't happen.
I saw a Jeep yesterday on the Triborough Bridge, and its front wheels were wobbling back and forth, and the driver had slowed down, and then I saw him, I passed him, and then a minute later he went flying by me. What could have been wrong with his vehicle, and was he making a mistake by driving fast after experiencing such a front end shimmy like that?
He could have had a lot of bent wheels will wobble. Loose tie rods will cause the wheels to bounce back and forth from left to right. Probably a combination of everything. He's probably got worn ball joints, worn tie rod ends, and possibly bent rims. And the combination can be very scary. I've driven in cars where after a collision, say, where a car gets hit on the wheel and the wheel wobbles, and it's not a fun thing to do, to drive that car down the highway at highway speed.
No, I remember a 72 Oldsmobile I had back in the early 80s, and let me get the part name right, the arm from the steering that goes into a sort of ball joint type thing on the wheel knuckle, it separated, and as long as I was at speed, that unattached wheel, the wheel unattached to the steering system, would follow along where I went, but when I tried to park, it wouldn't work. That was, I guess, neglect totally on my part that caused that.
We get cars in the collision shop after a collision that hit on the front wheel, and the tie rod will snap. That's probably what you're referring to. The tie rod, yes. That's what turns the wheel from left to right. And when one snaps, it's very difficult to control which direction the car is going.
That's an understatement. Now, on your show this past weekend, you mentioned something about window buffing. That, yes. I've on my glass, no matter what I do, how I go to clean it, especially in the side glass, there's like a permanent stain that won't go away, and the glass is not as clear as a result. What is window buffing? Now, you mentioned the tool. Do we use the same thing, the same compound on our glass that we would use on the car's body to do window buffing?
That's what I do. But you're giving away all my trade secrets.
People will hear this and know that you're the master and come see you as a result.
When the car is in the collision shop, it usually gets a lot of overspray on it, dust and residues, and we generally compound and polish the whole car. And if you feel the glass, if you run your fingers over the glass and it feels like it has a lot of resistance, a lot of friction, the glass is not clean. So I take a buff on just with regular compound. I just buff the glass until it's completely smooth. You don't feel any friction.
And that won't harm it at all? Won't scratch it?
No. Bring me your car. I'll buff half your windshield, and you'll see the differences like night and day.
And then I'll have to bring it back, and you have to buff the other half.
The first half is free.
Okay. The second half is double price. Well, let's talk about electric vehicles. You touched on them earlier. What are the main differences? You talked about some. What are the main difference between an ICE, an internal combustion engine vehicle, and an electric vehicle?
The main difference is that people today want to eliminate all emissions from transportation vehicles. That's one of the biggest areas, one of the biggest contributors to pollution in the atmosphere. So they want to eliminate the tailpipe emissions, especially California. California wants all vehicles to have zero emissions before everybody else does. So everybody's following California, and they want to, every year they want to reduce the emissions, more and more until we get to zero. But electric vehicles are not really zero emissions. They're just zero emissions out of the tailpipe. Because there's no tailpipe, there's no internal combustion engine. But they run on electricity, which has to be generated by either burning coal or oil or gas, natural gas, or nuclear, or water power, hydro or wind. So most of those methods produce some sort of emissions, hydrocarbon emissions.
On the vehicle itself, electric vehicles, now you mentioned cooling systems on electric vehicles. That's the first I've ever heard of that. But we don't have transmissions, and we don't have differentials, and all those other things get eliminated on electric vehicles, but things are added. And I know batteries for electric vehicles are usually pretty big. Where do they put them, and how much do they weigh? Is there a weight advantage with an electric vehicle compared to an internal combustion engine vehicle?
The electric or hybrid vehicle has a very heavy battery. The biggest weight in the electric vehicle is the battery. A Tesla battery weighs probably a ton.
Wow.
They're very heavy, and they're in the bottom of the car, so it makes the car very stable because the center of gravity is very low. The biggest problem with electric vehicles or hybrids is cooling. The battery and the inverter, the electrical components, generate a lot of heat. So they have to be cooled. They have their own separate cooling systems in most cases. You need to keep those electric vehicles really need to be maintained to exact manufacturer specs. If you don't, you will have failures. Electric vehicles are very reliable if they're maintained properly, and they don't require a lot of maintenance. They require probably 90% less maintenance, because the brakes will never wear out, because the motor is what stops the vehicle. The brakes do very little stopping.
Really?
The electric motor, through regenerative braking, when you slow the vehicle or you're going downhill, it charges the battery up again.
So the wheels connected to the electric motor, when you lift off the gas quote unquote, the motor actually slows the wheels down.
Yes.
Much like compression braking in an internal combustion engine vehicle.
Exactly.
Yeah. What is an inverter?
An inverter is what converts the DC battery volt. All batteries are DC voltage.
Okay.
But DC voltage is not very efficient for operating motors. AC power is much more efficient, much easier to control. So we use an inverter which converts the DC voltage into three-phase AC voltage. In most production, in fact, as far as I know, all production electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles. There are lots of other electric vehicles like golf carts and some do-it-yourself conversions that people have done at home. Those are mostly DC conversions. They just put in a DC motor and a big battery, a bank of batteries, and they have an electric vehicle. I helped my high school create an electric pickup truck about 30 years ago. Wow. The students took out the gas engine and transmission, put in the electric motor and the batteries. In my shop, we did all the fabrication for them because the school wasn't equipped to do that. So we did the fabrication to hold the batteries and the motor, and the students did all the other parts of the conversion. That was a DC. That was DC.
Now, these electric motors, are they on each of the wheels, or is there a central motor and shafts going to the wheels from them?
There are a few exotic vehicles that have in-wheel motors. That's a technology that I like a lot. But right now, I think it's only on very expensive exotic vehicles. Some race cars use that. Most production hybrid or electric vehicles have one or two motors, and then you still have a differential. Some still have a transmission, but they're not multi-speed. They're not multi-speed transmissions. They might just be from forward to reverse, or a high and low speed. The electric vehicles are much simpler. You know, one or two electric motors connected to a transmission. There's still a transmission. And in a hybrid vehicle, you need to be able to connect the gas engine to the drivetrain. There's different types of hybrids. There's parallel, there's series parallel, and that all has to do with the configuration of what actually drives the wheels. Does the gas engine drive the wheels? Does the electric motor drive the wheels? Do they drive it in combination? And they can have different combinations depending on what you need. If you need extra power and it's a parallel hybrid, you can use a gas engine and the batteries and the electric motor to drive if you're going up a hill, say. But if you're coming down a hill, then the gas engine shuts off and the electric motor becomes a generator and recharges the battery.
So it sounds like you could have a quote unquote performance hybrid, though that is not normally the case these days if you set it up in a certain way.
There are a lot of performance hybrids, yes.
Really?
There's Formula E racing. We've had the people from Formula E on the show. They're 100% electric race cars. It's just like big slot cars. You know, 50 years ago we had slot cars.
I remember.
My brother was a big slot car. He was a big slot car specialist. He was like the Mario Andretti of slot cars.
Wow.
And now we just have bigger slot cars.
Now you kind of mentioned that there is a certain quirk with electric vehicles when we were talking about this discussion, that there's a quirk with electric vehicles during thunderstorms. Did I understand you correctly?
I'm not familiar with that.
No?
But electric vehicles, any electrical component can be damaged by lightning. I had a telephone wire on the roof of my shop that got hit by lightning, and it fried the phones. Every phone in the building was fried.
Mm-hmm.
So if an electric vehicle gets hit by lightning, it can do a lot of damage. It'll definitely blow out the computers.
Is that separate and apart from the damage that could happen to a conventional vehicle if it were struck by lightning? Is that electric vehicle going to possibly sustain more damage if it's struck by lightning? And what would be the possible danger to the occupants of the vehicle in that situation?
If an old-fashioned car from the 40s or the 50s, even the 60s, got hit by lightning, there's no electronic components to get fried. Mm-hmm. You know, electronic ignition started in the 70s. And if that gets hit by lightning, or even static electricity can damage it.
Wow.
Now today, everything on the car is computer controlled. So if the car gets hit by lightning, a lot of damage can be done.
It's probably all over. That would be a write-off.
Not just lightning, but water damage. Every time you see on the news, you see the floods, the heavy rainstorms, hurricanes. You see cars floating down the street.
Right.
Those cars have dozens of computers in them. If that computer gets waterlogged, the car is basically junk. Most insurance companies will just total every car that gets flooded, because the biggest nightmare any technician ever faces is a water damaged car.
What are the challenges? What kind of voltages are we talking about that are present in electric vehicles? And if an electric vehicle is in a bad wreck, does it pose any extra dangers to first responders, those people coming, say, with the jaws of life? You know, could they touch a high-powered wire in an electric vehicle and wind up becoming injured themselves?
I took an online electric vehicle class last night, and they were showing pictures of how a shop put an electric car, a hybrid car, up on a lift and jacked right under the high voltage wire.
Oh.
Every electric car all the high voltage is contained in the orange wires. The wires that have high voltage are identified with orange coverings. So you never want to touch anything orange on an electric car unless you have gloves that are rated to withstand 1,000 volts.
Wow.
You can get hit with up to 1,000 volts on an electric car, and that's not fun. I've never been hit with that much voltage, but they also showed us a picture last night of somebody that was hit with 480 volts, and his hand looked like it was on a barbecue for an hour.
Wow. Wow. I know it's like 650 to 700 volts that runs a subway train. So 1,000 volts, that's a considerable amount of electricity and very dangerous.
Most hybrids are around 200, 300, 400 volts. That's anything over 60 volts can kill you.
Wow.
Anything over 60 volts is considered high voltage.
So the wall current, 110 volts, that could kill you conceivably.
That's AC.
Touched it. That's
AC.
AC.
The DC voltage is more deadly.
I see. Okay.
The AC voltage will shock you, but since it alternates, it doesn't pull you in. The DC voltage is in one direction, and once it latches onto you, you can't get away. The AC voltage, you'll get a shock, but since it alternates, it's not pulling in one direction. DC pulls in one direction. It's like a magnet, you know. It's like being pulled in by a strong magnet. Where AC, it's alternating, so you go from plus to minus. It doesn't pull in one direction. It's not as dangerous.
I remember getting an electric shock one time AC, and it felt like vibration. Is that the alternating current happening? Is that what I felt?
Yes, everybody who's worked on house electricity without pulling the fuse or turning off the circuit breaker, I've done it many times. I've been shocked by 110 volts. It's sort of invigorating, but DC voltage is deadly.
Yes.
Now, the responders do have to have special training on handling high voltage vehicles.
I remember when, in fact, AAA reproduced a towing manual, and it has and it's a thick book with the different information about vehicles and how to tow them and how to deal with them in a crash or something like that. And there was specific information about electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles. And I got a call once from a fire chief, I believe in Westchester, and he asked about our towing manual, and I sent him one because the first responders were concerned with the hybrid vehicles. This is probably 10 years ago, the burgeoning amount of hybrid vehicles and how to deal with them when they had an emergency. And I sent him the book, and I wound up having to send them 5 more of the books because the information was so good in talking about the dangers that existed with hybrid vehicles back then. I'm wondering, what advice would you give to a person who's considering buying an electric vehicle? Should they just go off and buy it and plug it into their wall outlet? What should they know?
Go online, do a lot of research. There's so much information online about learning about electric vehicles. Go on, do your research, learn as much as you can about electric and hybrids before you buy it. Just like we recommend, if you're going to buy any vehicle, make sure you're comfortable in it, make sure you're going to be happy with it. And that's especially true with an electric because it's so different from what everybody has been used to.
California has said that they will not allow gasoline-powered vehicles in 2035, and I think New York is talking about following along with that, and probably only 0.1% of all the vehicles on the road these days are electric. And the idea is that these numbers will just increase and increase and increase. Do you think that's practical?
We're only about a year or 2 or 3 years away from the electric vehicle becoming less expensive to purchase and less expensive to operate. And when that happens, who's going to want to spend the extra money to operate a gas-powered vehicle?
So the numbers will increase without a doubt.
The manufacturers are all geared up to produce 100% electric vehicles conventional, regular vehicles, you know, passenger vehicles. We're still
Right.
going to have diesel trucks and heavy equipment. I don't think we're going to see electric-powered earth movers. But we have electric-powered aircraft flying around today.
Really?
Yes, there are electric and pure electric and hybrid electric airplanes flying.
Propeller airplane.
Yes.
Okay. I was trying to imagine electric trying to do the job of a jet engine. And Volvo is.
I actually read about an electric, a sort of an electric jet. A jet engine is just a series of fans.
Right.
That they now have. I saw an electric motor that has similar to a jet engine fan inside the electric motor.
Wow.
It's a prototype. It's in testing now.
Yeah. So those electric fans would compress that air and shoot it out the back, and you'd have essentially a jet engine.
Yeah. There's been an electric-powered, solar-powered plane that flew around the world.
Right. Right. Very good. Well, let's talk about something I know that's very close to your heart. We spent the last few minutes here talking about the automotive technician field. And I've read articles of yours, and you've talked about the fact that a lot of parents and a lot of kids are wasting money going to college. They haven't been prepared for college, and that we are neglecting the trades to a great degree in this country. And really the only entity that's doing a lot of work in promoting the trades is the military. And that we actually face a national crisis because of the lack of skilled tradesmen in the automotive field to maintain equipment, infrastructure, and what have you. Why don't you tell us about that? How glaring is the need for automotive technicians? What kind of jobs are we talking about? How many? And what do youngsters need to know? What skills do they need to be able to become an automotive technician? You teach them.
I teach it. Actually, I'm a product of automotive education in high school. And even 50, 60 years ago, my high school tried to keep me out of auto shop. And I've discovered a lot of other people in the same situation. The schools tried to keep anybody who the school feels is intelligent enough and talented enough to go to college, a 4-year college. They don't want to put them in a trade program because they want those people to all go to 4-year colleges. I'm not against 4-year colleges. I went to college right out of high school. I'm not anti-college. I'm just against students studying the wrong things that don't make them happy, things that they're not really qualified to study. And when they could be better suited to studying a trade, they can make a much better living. A top technician, you know the guys on my show.
Yes.
We all pay technicians a lot more than the average college graduate makes. A top technician can make thousands of dollars a week, but that's not right out of school. That's somebody that's got a lot of experience. But even a starting salary for technicians is probably equal to or better than the average college graduate's starting salary.
Mm-hmm.
And
I was going to say with a lot less of the debt from the college education.
Right. People can come to our school, and the tuition at our school is very, very reasonable. There are private trade schools where the tuition can be much more. You can spend probably from $5,000 to $40,000 to learn this trade, depending on how many aspects of the trade you want to learn and whether you go to a private school or a public school. But there is a lot of training available out there, and really the high schools should do a better job of evaluating students and figuring out what the students are best suited to study, what their talents are. Everybody has some sort of natural talent. I compare it to the sports education in schools. Every school has sports teams. They don't put the guy that belongs on the weightlifting team, they don't put him on the gymnastics team. They don't put football players on the tennis court, right? Then they don't put tennis players on the basketball court. Everybody has their own natural abilities, their own natural tendencies, and their own natural likes and dislikes. So in schools, they can do a good job of sorting out what sports are most likely that the student will excel at, or even if they don't excel, at least they can be competent at. Like I said, you don't see a 400-pound gymnast, right? But they don't apply the same logic to guiding students into what careers they might want to investigate. I say use the same logic in determining what careers students should be pursuing, or at least investigating. You know, and some people think they might like this business, but they may not have the talent. But there may be some other, if they don't have good hands, you know, to be a technician, they might have some skills in other areas. You know, they could be salespeople, parts people. There's so many different aspects to this industry, and we need more technicians. That's the bottom line. The average age of technicians is over 50. You know, every technician is nearing retirement age. There's not enough young people coming in, and when we run out of mechanics, everything will stop working. And then the schools will say, why didn't we train more technicians?
Yeah, I've heard people who have shiny new luxury vehicles from overseas, and they take them into the shop, and it might be something that's relatively minor, but the shop has to have the vehicle for 4 or 5 weeks. It's not because the work is that complicated and takes that long. It'll take them that long to get to the vehicle.
Yes.
How many?
Big shortage of technicians.
How many jobs are we talking about that might be available nationwide?
I've seen statistics that say we need 50 to 60 new technicians every year. 50 to 60,000.
Yes.
Every year.
That's
going to be probably the next 20 years.
What skills? Well, maybe they might not have the skills, but maybe if they have the enthusiasm and the desire to learn, a young person could become an auto tech. But if there are some basic skills that they should have, what should they be?
They should like to solve problems, because that's what we do. We solve problems. They have to have a little bit of manual skill, you know, skilled hands. You have to be able to operate, just like a surgeon has to be able to operate the scalpel, right? We have to be just like doctors. We have to operate whatever equipment we need. Today, a lot of electronic skill is necessary. You know, computer skills. We program. There's more computer code in the average car today than most aircraft.
Right, I've read that. Than a fighter plane or a passenger airliner. That's stunning to think about.
We need all kinds of people with all kinds of skills. We need body people, painters. We need glass people, electronics people, computer people. And we still need the regular old run-of-the-mill mechanic that changes tires and wheels and brakes. Although with electric cars, when electric cars become the mainstream, there will be a lot less, you know, what you could say is normal maintenance, tires and brakes. But there's still going to be a lot of work for the next foreseeable future. There'll be plenty of work. Anybody who gets into the trade today will be busy the rest of their working life.
They won't get laid off because of pandemics.
No, in fact, our trade, I think, is the best of all the skilled trades, because people in construction trades, they tend to get laid off part of the year. You know, they go from project to project. When a project is finished, they have to wait for the next project.
Right.
Any automotive technician who's any good will never get laid off. There's unlimited amount of work, and more work than most technicians want to do. Most technicians turn down a lot of overtime. I know technicians that do unbelievable amounts of overtime and make huge salaries every week. much more than the average college graduate. The schools want every kid to go to 4-year college, get into tons of debt, but that's not in the student's best interest. If the student would be happier working with his hands, I have 2 degrees and I still love working with my hands. Every day, I'm fixing something almost every day. And I get just as much satisfaction out of fixing a machine or a car or a truck as I get from anything else I do.
The article I read from the Washington Times from October of 2019, last year, in fact, I'm sorry, it was July 23rd, 2019. If anybody wants to look the article up, the headline was "Why College is a Waste for Many High School Graduates." And it talked about the fact that people who go to college and graduate with a lot of debt and don't get a job that pays a decent salary wind up being years in debt. It delays their getting married, having children, buying a home, just really having a better quality of life because they're saddled with that debt and they have to pay it off. Whereas if they had become an auto technician, the debt is far less and they'll get a job paying a salary that will enable them to pay it off and they can move on with a better life more quickly.
I say everybody should go to college, but some people should go to college right out of high school, and some should go later on after they've learned the trade, made a good living, and now they want to move up into management positions. Then it's time to go back to school and get some different skills. But for most kids, I'd say half the kids coming out of high school that go into college, half of them that go into 4-year colleges don't graduate. So we can presume that the half that don't graduate with a degree in 4 or 5 or 6 years, they might have been better off learning a trade where they could be making a good salary instead of paying student debt. They could be earning every week and earning a very, very good living.
I've read that some of the vehicle manufacturers, in fact, have programs where I've read that they've reached into the middle schools, 5th, 6th, 7th grade, trying to plant the seed in students' minds of becoming a tech, and that there are programs for those that graduate high school. They can go right into this manufacturer's program, and in fact, the manufacturer will pay for them to be educated in that program, and then they could get a job anywhere in the world where that vehicle is sold and being worked on. Is that true?
Yes, in fact, we did reports on our show about 2 different programs, at least 2 different programs, where the car manufacturers are reaching down into grade schools and trying to get kids interested in tech careers. And when you hear people on the news talk about tech careers, they're all talking about computer programming jobs. But there's a lot more to technology than just computer programming. Like we say today, cars, there are no more cars being made. There are only computers on wheels. Because every car manufactured today is really a computer on wheels. And the manufacturers do have programs recruiting. We had several of the manufacturers recruiters on the show talking about how they travel the country, going to high schools and colleges, recruiting technicians into their manufacturer program. My teaching assistant at Bronx Community College is a woman who graduated from our program, I think about 8 or 9 years ago. And she went into BMW's training program right out of school. And now she's a top technician at BMW. She can go anywhere in the world and work on BMWs. I know several other people that have been through that BMW training program. They recruit right out of colleges. I don't think they go into the high schools, but they come to our school twice a year to recruit. Wow. We also have Ford and Nissan does the same thing. I'm sure all the other manufacturers do it also. I just haven't had all the others on the Auto Lab yet to talk about it, but eventually we'll get all the manufacturers to come on air and promote their programs.
Start with the A's, Acura through Volvo, right? Is there a clearinghouse of information, a one-stop website where a youngster can go to get information about becoming an auto tech, or should they look up various trade schools or the vehicle manufacturers where would they start to get information about how they should prepare themselves for a career as a tech?
A very good source is an organization called the Tech Force Foundation. If you Google Tech Force Foundation, they have an assessment test that young people can take to see if they might be suited to a career fixing vehicles. They
Tech
also
Force.
have Tech
I'm sorry,
Force,
go ahead.
it's the Tech Force Foundation.
techforcefoundation.org.
I believe it is.
Okay.
Or you can send us an email at autolabradio.gmail, autolabradio@gmail.com, autolabradio@gmail.com, and we will direct those people to sources where they can find information on automotive careers.
Very good. I know if I were of the appropriate age, that being a tech would be something, certainly if I were a young person. And really the enthusiasm for vehicles that exists these days, there's so many car shows that are on television, and it must be there, they must be there because there's the enthusiasm, the interest in cars out there. And if those young people, they certainly should, and this is something they have a passion about, they should certainly investigate becoming an auto technician. A great job, and something that we need very desperately in our nation.
Any young person who likes watching car shows or likes fixing things, fixing bicycles or model cars or model airplanes or anything like that. Even computer games, kids that are good at computer games can be very good at programming cars. In fact, a lot of the people and the technicians I know that are programmers of vehicles, they started out as gamers.
Wow. And this is a profession that's open to all genders. I remember when I visited your program at Bronx Community, one of your top students was a young lady. Yes. And she was very enthusiastic and very skilled, and there are a lot of female technicians these days.
I have 2 students in my hybrid class now. They're very good students. But I also last year I had a student who was 68 years old, and I met a student at another school who was also 68 years old. So come on up, Robert, we'll sign you up whenever you want.
Listen, I do my own brake jobs still, and on my wife's vehicle and my vehicle, and we haven't killed anybody yet, but I would imagine there's some things I need to know. I've been doing them since the 70s. I probably need to update my skill set, so you can count on me coming up there and maybe taking the brake program. Can you take just one of the 63 ASE certified courses?
You can take whatever you want.
Okay.
They're open. Right. The test is open to everyone. You cannot get certified unless you have 2 years of work experience or 1 year of work experience and a degree, a high school or a college automotive program substitutes for 1 year of work experience. So students that graduate from any automotive program, a recognized automotive program, an accredited program, they can get certified with just 1 year of trade experience.
Just 1 year and you can have a job.
Well, you can have a job immediately. A lot of students have jobs while they're still in school. There's so much demand for workers out there in the field that a lot of shops are hiring students while they're still in school. And they tend to be very good employees because they have the interest to go to school and learn more.
Well, I hope
50 years ago, there weren't that many training programs around.
I hope anyone. Oh, wait a minute. I want to ask a question. We did get one question. How important are the soft skills to a new technician? Conversational skills, for example, I would bet that's very, very important.
Soft skills are very important. Just soft skills meaning how you get along with other people, basically. That's important no matter what career you're in. Now, it used to be that people could work in the back of the shop and never talk to anybody. There were certain people that I've known in the trade that were not good at getting along with people. So they would just go in the back of the shop. They have their own little work area, and nobody would deal with them. But it's not really possible to do that anymore because the cars are so advanced, so technical, that you have to be able to communicate with a lot of other people. We have to do research to get the repair information we need. We have to go online, download the repair specs, the repair procedures. You have to be able to read and write. You have to be able to understand the repair procedures. You have to be able to operate a computer. You talked about doing brakes on your car. Most cars today, you can't do a brake job, replace the brake pads without a scan tool plugged into your car. You can't bleed the brakes on a lot of cars without using a scan tool to control the brake bleeding process. So you really need good people skills, no matter what field you're in today. Every other trade is the same way. Every other trade is equally, or maybe not equally, because we do have, I think, the highest level of technology, because we're working on really space age cars. There's more technology in cars today than everything that we sent to the moon. Wow. A lot more technology. So yeah, you really have to be able to, number one, learn the technology, which means being able to communicate with other people, understand the teacher. Some of my students are not that good at, reading and writing. So, we help them along. Eventually they'll get it. One problem I always have with the high schools is they don't let the students who are good at trade skills, they don't allow them to do, trade related reading or trade related math. We have some of the things we do require a lot of mathematics. So, and students can be very good at that type of math, but not so good at trigonometry or algebra,
Right.
There's a lot of different skills that we need in this trade, and students really should investigate our trade and all the other trades as well. Everybody is suited to something. Just like I said, every athlete is suited best to one particular sport, or to some people may be good at 2 or 3 sports, but nobody's good at every sport. Nobody has the physical attributes to be good at every sport. Nobody has all the mental and physical attributes to be good at fixing every type of vehicle. You need different skills to change circuit components on a circuit board than you need to change a transmission in a diesel truck. That requires a different skill level. But there are people that like doing both of those jobs. People that are good at each of those jobs. The trick is to find out what you like and what you're good at.
That sounds like that skills assessment on techforcefoundation.org assessment test is something that would be very important in helping a person decide what they might want to do related to the automotive field. I hope anyone watching, from young to old, we talk manufacturers going into middle schools trying to impress upon students the need for auto technicians.
We don't discriminate for any reason: age, race, sex, gender. Anybody who has the interest and the aptitude to learn what we do, we're happy to have them.
Fantastic. A viable career alternative these days, when unfortunately we're seeing so many that are suffering, having lost their jobs as a result of the pandemic. We see the weekly numbers of those filing for unemployment. Here's a way out, and we hope that those who are watching that may be interested will take advantage of it. Michael, I cannot thank you enough for doing this today. This is a thrilling discussion, one that I've been wanting to have probably since, how long have I been doing your show? Since 2017, and hearing you answer all these questions that come in from your listeners about vehicles, and I always had my own, and it's just been a great pleasure speaking with you, and I thank you very much for joining us today on a AAA Automotive Conversation.
Anytime. I hope somebody out there may look into becoming a technician as a result of this.
We hope so. And your program is Saturday morning, 7 to 9 a.m., 970 a.m., WNYM, and we hope people will tune in. And we thank you for viewing our AAA Automotive conversation with Michael Porcelli, Bronx Community College, and so many other things. Stay tuned. There will be other events that we'll be having, other webinars covering a range of topics, and we hope that you will join us again soon. Thank you very much for watching, and seeing you again real soon.